I am really excited to be here. I am the Reuben Merck Professor of Organizational Character and the Faculty Director, as of August 1st, of the Sanford C. Bernstein and Company Center for Leadership and Ethics. So I'm really excited to be here. It is my pleasure to welcome you all here tonight to the Botwinick Prize in Business Ethics, honoring Mr. Kenneth Frazier. Kenneth is the chairman and the CEO and chairman of the board and chief executive officer of Merck and Company Incorporated. For close to 29 years, the Botwinick Prize has been regarded as one of the highlights of the fall semester here at CBS. It reiterates the importance of the ethical behavior in business leadership, especially in today's globalized economy. So at this time, first I'd like to ask Senior Vice Dean of Research, Shiva Rajgopal, to come up here and give us some remarks on behalf of the Dean's Office. Thank you, Shiva.
Good evening. I'm pleased to welcome all of you here on behalf of the Dean's Office. A special warm welcome to the members of the Botwinick Wolfenson family, whose dedication and commitment to the school is much appreciated. It's an honor and a privilege to congratulate Mr. Kenneth Frazier on receiving the prestigious Botwinick Prize in Business Ethics this evening at Columbia Business School. For close to 30 years, the prize has truly celebrated CBS's commitment to honoring productive, moral, caring business leadership at work. And as such, I want to extend a special thank you to the members of the Bernstein Center, whose work in ethics and leadership is not only a key stone of CBS education here, but whose impact extends well beyond the classroom in instilling in all of our students values and integrity needed to be true, ethical, and global leaders. And I want to acknowledge two special faculty members who have helped shape and cultivate the center and the prize over the years. Former director, Professor Bruce Kogut, who also happens to be my neighbor. So, and Professor Kathy Phillips, the new director of the Bernstein Center. I could not think of two more distinguished faculty members and friends to lead our students to be more socially responsible in business. So thank you again for coming tonight, and we congratulate Mr. Frazier again on this momentous occasion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shiva. Since 1989, the Bernstein Center for Leadership and Ethics has awarded this Botwinick Prize in Business Ethics and Ethical Practice in the Professions to an individual or representative of a business organization exemplifying the highest standard of professional and ethical conduct, as well as ethical decision-making and leadership. So we do this with the generous support of our proud benefactors of the prize, the Botwinick Wolfenson family. The prize was established by Mr. Benjamin Botwinick, a 1926 graduate of the business school, along with his wife, Bessie. After graduation, Mr. Botwinick went on to become a well-respected CPA at the Benjamin Botwinick and Company firm, and in 1957, him and his wife established the Botwinick Wolfenson Foundation, Incorporated. Though Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Botwinick are no longer with us, the Bernstein Center is lucky to have the unwavering support of their two children and their spouses, Edward Botwinick and his wife, Vicki Brown, and Elaine and James Wolfenson, both proud Columbia University alums. Yeah. Thank you. We thank them both kindly for their continuous support. And Elaine is actually here with us tonight, so I'll have her join me shortly to help co-present the prize to our honoree. Additionally, we wanted to acknowledge and honor a former recipient of the Botwinick Prize who has so kindly joined us tonight, Donald J. Weiss. Where are you, Donald? Are you here? He's not quite here yet. He's supposed to be here with us. He was the former president and CEO of White Systems Incorporated, a leading US manufacturer of automated retrieval systems. He received the prize in 1993. So it's just a testimony to how connected we stay after giving this prize. People want to come back and be with us. Currently, it actually turns out that Donald serves as an adjunct professor of business here at CBS. And so we're lucky to have his expertise in the front of the classroom as well. Who knows, maybe one day Ken Frazier will come and teach some students too. Okay, so this year's nominating committee, including Edward and Elaine, a number of students, faculty, alumni, as well as the former director of the center, Professor Bruce Kogut, unanimously agreed that Kenneth Frazier's lifelong pursuit of and commitment to ethical leadership made him eminently worthy of this prize. Kenneth Frazier has served as the chairman of the board and chief executive officer of Merck Incorporated since 2011. Under Ken's leadership, Merck has created innovative life-saving medicines and vaccines, as well as long-term and sustainable value to its multiple stakeholders. Ken has substantially increased Merck's investment in research, including early research, while refocusing the organization on the launch and growth of key products that provide benefit to society. He has also led the formation of philanthropic and other initiatives that build upon Merck's 125-year-plus legacy, which includes the tenure of former Merck CEO, Dr. P. Roy Vagelos, who we are so happy to have with us here tonight. Say hello, Roy. He's here sitting in the front. Dr. Vagelos has contributed greatly to the fields of medicine, education, and business alike, and we would be remiss if we did not mention his commitment to ethical leadership, which he shares in common with our honoree. Now more than ever, we need business leaders to understand that effective ethical decision-making touches every aspect of business, from the daily choices made by employees in an organization, to the checks and balances created through corporate governance, to using organizations to do good in society through socially responsible practices and decisions. Kenneth understands all of this very well as he continues to stand up for what he believes is right in the face of adversity, all while securing Merck's position as a world-class and patient-first healthcare institution. So at this time, I would actually like to welcome and invite Elaine Wolfenson to the podium to help co-present the prize.
Thank you. I'll make one minor correction. I'm a Columbia graduate, although I did not go here undergraduate. My father created this prize, I guess 29 years ago, at the time of insider trading. And he was sort of appalled by, now we've heard so much about insider trading. We didn't know much about it then. And he was so horrified that people in business would be dishonest, and I think he was maybe somewhat naive, that he talked with the then dean of Columbia, and they realized that every business school needs ethics. And they created a prize at a time when there was really no ethics at Columbia. Subsequently, there's been a chair of ethics, the Bernstein Center, so it's had a wonderful impact. And as a daughter, it's wonderful to remember my father for what he's done. On my way here tonight, I called an old friend of mine, Vernon Jordan. I said, I've never met Mr. Frazier. What would you like me to say? And your friend and my friend, Mr. Jordan, said, tell him that when W.E.B. Du Bois talked about the talented 10th, his dream would be someone just like Ken Frazier. So we are very proud to invite you up to receive this award.
And thank you all for coming out in the rain tonight. I hope I hold up my end of the bargain by making it worthwhile. I know it's a new school year, and I want to welcome all the students who are here because I'm told that Columbia Business School students ask some of the hardest questions, and so I'm looking forward to that. I also want to thank you, Professor Phillips, for that very kind introduction. I'm honored to be here tonight. I'm honored to receive this award. At the outset, I just want to acknowledge again the prescience of the Botwinicks, because nearly 30 years after the establishment of this award, its purpose is even more clear today. You said your dad was appalled that business people would be unethical. But unfortunately, almost every day, the headlines in the newspapers detail some violation of codes of conduct by senior executives. And that's really quite unfortunate, because it creates this impression on the part of people that business only exists to take advantage of other people. I want to thank you all for this award. I want to thank Shivram Rajgopal and as well as Elaine Wolfenson for your kind remarks tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge once again Dr. Roy Vagelos and Diana Vagelos, who are in attendance this evening. Those two have donated more than $300 million to Columbia Medical School, which is now known as the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons. And through their extraordinary generosity, the medical school is now able to eliminate loans for those students who have financial need. As you heard, Roy was also my predecessor as CEO of Merck, and he is someone, I believe, who's shown through example what ethical leadership is all about. He also had an outside impact on shaping my own personal view of the role of a CEO. I mentioned in the other room, Roy's last year as CEO was my first year in the company. I had the privilege of being his head of communications and policy. And on my best day, in many ways, I'm simply repeating things that Roy used to say. And I'll just share one of those things that I try to think about all the time, which is that in this business, there are only two metrics that matter. How many people do you help? And how much help do you give those people? That's a very simple thing to say, but if you keep that in mind, it really is a North Star in terms of how you run a company like Merck. And I do consider it a huge privilege to run Merck, which has been around for 127 years, seeking to extend and improve people's lives. The company has been responsible for some of the most significant scientific advancements and improvements in public health, including MMR, the first trivalent measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, Mevacor, the first drug in the statin class, Crixivan, one of the first effective drugs for people with HIV/AIDS, several leading antibiotics, and Gardasil, a revolutionary vaccine for cervical cancer and other forms of malignant disease. In 1952, the cover of Time magazine depicted our modern-day founder, George W. Merck, and highlighted what I think is the quintessential expression of corporate responsibility. In that article, he said, "We try to never to forget that medicine is for the people. It is not for the profits. The profits follow, and if we have remembered that, they have never failed to appear." Our culture we seek to base on that ideal. Personally, I was born and raised in the inner city of Philadelphia in what was sort of a tough neighborhood, and I never, ever dreamed that I could rise to a position like the one that I hold now as CEO of Merck. But I was very lucky throughout my life to have a lot of very important mentors and sponsors, including Roy Vagelos. You see, Roy had a very broad perception of the world, and it was broad enough to consider that someone like me, a lawyer, by the way, when I say I'm a lawyer, I'm not a lawyer in the pejorative sense of the word, but he had this idea that even a lawyer, such as myself, could rise and be of value to a company like Merck. And he showed me the meaningful role that business leaders can play in improving society. For example, his leadership in what's now known as the Mectizan donation program has allowed us to give over 300 million free treatments each year for river blindness and lymphatic filariasis. The impact has been huge. Those diseases, river blindness is on the verge of being eliminated in Latin America completely and has been dramatically reduced in Africa. And then after he and Diana made their initial contribution to Columbia, here's another story, it'll be my last Roy Vagelos story. He probably doesn't remember this, but they made a contribution a few years ago, I think it was $50 million, and I wrote a note to Roy, and I said I thought that was a fabulous thing, and Roy responded in his classic blunt way. He said, "You should remember that there's no such thing as a poor philanthropist." it's important that you run the company in a way that creates value for people, including your shareholders. And I share that specific example because it goes without saying that in order to be successful, businesses need to stay in business. However, if you look over the long term, the most successful businesses have a mission or purpose that extends well beyond just providing good returns for shareholders. Businesses exist to serve society, and in so doing, they strengthen the fabric of society. Some businesses offer the most sustainable solutions to society's problems. And I believe that Merck is one of those companies with an outsized mission to relieve human suffering on a mass scale. To achieve that, we must take on big projects which are long, risky, and expensive. Now, a lot of companies, including companies in the pharmaceutical industry, don't have the appetite for that kind of risk. In fact, when I became CEO, there were loud demands from the investment community for companies like Merck to reduce their research budgets. Many called for companies to stop investing in research altogether and instead to in-license products from others. Brand new to the role, I made the decision that Merck was not going to take money away from the important research we were doing to achieve a short-term gain or just to meet the numbers. It didn't support our core commitment to research, and it wasn't in the long-term interest of our company. Instead, we had to withdraw our long-term guidance. Now, one reporter called that move gutsy, but unfortunately, his was not the predominant view. Some analysts called the move disingenuous. Some said it was even unethical. They felt that we'd broken a solemn promise to our shareholders, but I felt it was my job to do the right thing to run the company for the long term to ensure we develop the next generation of treatments. Fortunately, over time, our shareholders have been rewarded. We've given them a return on their investment with products like Keytruda, which is changing the way cancer is being treated. Keytruda provides new hope for patients. It has taken the cancer field over 50 years to translate the fundamental science behind anti-PD-1 antibodies into useful medicines. We're now continuing to investigate this promising treatment, running more than 800 clinical trials with Keytruda and testing it in more than 30 tumor types. This is a huge effort, but it's been transformative in terms of cancer care. We believe that Merck has the compelling biology, the chemical capability to produce composition of matter, new composition of matter, the clinical expertise, the capital, and the ethical imperative to develop drugs that are needed like Keytruda. Our business model requires access to large amounts of patient capital, that is for investors, to be patient so we can take the difficult, long, and risky journey of developing new therapeutics for patients. The drug development process is one of massive winnowing. In the end, over 90% or so of what seem like good ideas never make it to the market. On average, it takes more than 10 years and in excess of $2.5 billion to develop a new drug. In order to be sustainable, we must balance the abundant risks, the ever-present risks of failure, with a sufficient reward when we are successful to produce a risk-adjusted return on capital that is attractive to our investors. And when we are successful, we're often challenged by those who think the price for these breakthroughs is far too high. For example, the list price for Keytruda is about $13,000 per month. While the average out-of-pocket cost for patients with insurance or Medicare is considerably less, new medicines are costly. This raises another ethical issue. How does one price medicines in a way that both provides an adequate return for shareholders and meaningful access for patients who need them? I see this as the fundamental ethical challenge for our company and the biopharmaceutical industry. And for me, it comes down to balancing the disparate needs of multiple stakeholders, those of patients, shareholders, employees, healthcare payers, and society itself. The better we balance those needs, the more successful we will be in sustainably pursuing our mission of improving and saving lives. Let me share another recent example, this one involving what might be considered a neglected tropical disease. In 2014, the Ebola virus, which can kill half of its victims, ravaged West Africa, taking some 11,000 lives and sickening 25,000 more before it was properly contained. At the time, we were doing work in our vaccine research organization that we felt lent itself to research in Ebola. We began to look at the pioneering work done elsewhere and realized if we took a program over, if we paid for the IP, if we brought it into house and invested our resources and talent, there was a good chance that we could do something for the world. Now, not everyone would applaud that decision given the considerable resources it takes to conduct research, development, and manufacturing, and the fact that there is little profit to be gained in the area of Ebola. But this year, as the Ebola virus struck not once but twice in Central Africa, we were proud to see Merck's investigational vaccine delivered in the affected areas. Health officials, including the World Health Organization, say the vaccine was the key differentiator from the last outbreak and gives them hope for a tool to help control the virus. Public health officials have even called it a game changer. Ebola remains a serious threat, but the investigational vaccine offers great value to society as a potential tool to better fight this deadly virus. As I mentioned, some may say that investing to develop an Ebola vaccine doesn't make good business sense in the short run, but I believe these were the types of challenges that Merck was designed to tackle, and in the long run, that work helps us recruit the kind of scientific talent that it takes to be successful. We were very pleased that Fortune recognized these efforts and last month named Merck to be the #2 company in its Change the World list. More important, it is consistent with the company's heritage going back again to Dr. Vagelos' decision to donate Mectizan for river blindness for as long as it's needed, which is a hallmark of corporate social responsibility. So, in closing, I appreciate that in this audience, there are some future global business leaders. It is important to know who you are and what you believe in before you step into the role of business leadership. Nothing will prepare you for the job until you're in it. More importantly, you have to know what your company stands for. A company's value or net worth per se and its intrinsic values do not have to be at odds. Jeff Bezos said, "I strongly believe that missionaries make better products. They care more. For a missionary, it's not just about the business. There has to be a business, and the business has to make sense, but that's not why you do it. You do it because you have something meaningful that motivates you." Well, the opposite of the missionary that Jeff talks about is a mercenary, a person who, for as long as they get paid enough money, is willing to fight for either side. They are not motivated by cause. I hope as you go through the course of your studies and also your career, you will reach not just for success, but also for significance. Thank you for your generous listening, and now I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Ken. That was amazing. Let me tell you guys how things will unfold for the rest of our time. We have some questions that have been submitted by students in advance, and I'm going to ask Ken a few of those questions. Certainly won't be able to ask them all, because I think we got more than 30 questions or something crazy. So I will be asking a few of those questions and then opening up the conversation to the audience, okay? So we're going to take a seat right here, Ken. I'm going to grab this.
In the acknowledgments, I forgot to acknowledge my spouse, Andrea, who's sitting in the front row. Thank you. That was a close one.
You almost got in big trouble. Okay, so there's a lot of questions here in different areas, but I'm going to start with one that is a pretty fundamental question. It's, what is the most fundamental ethical challenge facing the pharma industry today in the US and abroad. And do you think that will be the same over the next 10 to 15 years? Or will it change, or will the ethical challenges remain the same?
Well, I think, as I said in my talk, I think the hardest thing for these companies to deal with is squaring the challenge of creating enough value for shareholders, because after all, they do take a huge amount of risk over a long period of time. Our job is to not just innovate. I don't like that word, because we actually invent things. The composition of matter we invent never existed before. And it's really hard to come up with cures for things like cancer and Alzheimer's disease. The industry spent $100 billion failing at curing Alzheimer's disease so far. And yet, if we don't do something about it, it's going to be a terrible scourge for society. So you have that side of things. At the same time, when you have in your hand a life-saving drug like Keytruda, there are a lot of people who can't pay for it. I'm very proud to say that our company has given away more than 20,000 free doses of Keytruda for people who truly can't pay. 20,000 patients, not doses, I'm sorry. We treated 20,000 patients. But that, to me, is the hardest ethical challenge. What does it mean to do right by your shareholders and do right by patients at the same time?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, in recent years, we've seen pharmaceuticals companies' share prices basically implode, right? Gilead and Harvoni, as a result of curing its customers, right? So is curing patients essentially bad business for pharma companies?
No, I hear people ask that all the time, and the answer is no. Because the reality of the world is that we pursue these things because we want to make a difference. We see unmet medical need. One of the things that I think sometimes people don't understand about a company like Merck is that in our research labs, we have thousands of dedicated scientists. And they may get a paycheck from Merck, but they're motivated by making a contribution to society. And if there's an opportunity to cure a disease, and by the way, cures are a very rare thing in the world, then people are going to step up to that. And the value to society long-term is higher. So, people will make the argument that you want to treat people for years and years and years for chronic disease. But that business model, you make a little bit of money over a long period of time. With the cure, you can actually charge a significant amount of money because you're going to save the healthcare system a lot of money over a long period of time. And that's why there was so much controversy originally about the price of hepatitis C drugs, because you were paying up front for the cure, and the value is over many, many years.
Right. So, I mean, we could talk more about the kind of trade-off of trying to help shareholders and customers, but it sounds to me that you guys really reconcile that with the idea that, in fact, you can, in fact, do good for the customers and do good for the shareholders at the same time.
I think that's right. I mentioned Jeff Bezos. I think he's an interesting example because some people might argue that he became the richest man in the world and he runs a $1 trillion company precisely because he didn't focus on the short-term issues relative to providing value to shareholders. He cared about his shareholders, but at the end of the day, he knew that meeting the customer's needs, delighting his customers, was the means to getting long-term shareholder value.
Right. So we had, before we came into the room, we had a little conversation with some of the professors who are here in the room in the healthcare program, and we were talking a little bit about the supply chain, the entire chain of the healthcare system. And so there's a question here from one of the students that says, as the healthcare value chain continues to evolve and your distribution partners begin to leverage new tactics to drive volume, how do you ensure that Merck's value continues to inform the structure of its numerous and complex relationships?
That's a very good question. I think at the end of the day, the value of our medicine to patients is relatively clear. You take a drug like Keytruda. We just studied it in the context of newly diagnosed lung cancer patients, small cell lung cancer patients, and we're able to show that if you use Keytruda in conjunction with the current standard of care, platinum-based chemotherapy, you can reduce the risk of death associated with lung cancer by 51%. It's a lot. In the United States, 160,000 people a year die of that condition. So if you can reduce it by 51%, that's a lot. I think the role of the supply chain needs to be examined, to tell you the truth. Everyone in that supply chain has some value, but right now, if you look across Merck's portfolio of US products, roughly 50% of each dollar goes into the supply chain, and we keep 50%. Well, we take a lot of risk for our 50%, and I think the supply chain has some value, but I think maybe not equal value.
I'm thinking about all the people here in the room who might be thinking about getting into supply chain in the healthcare industry now. Let's talk a little bit about the fact that you were trained as a lawyer. I think some people find that surprising that you have someone here who is essentially, I understand, a death penalty lawyer.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Who actually ended up as the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. And there are lots of people here in the audience who are thinking about, pursuing their career and maybe changing their career in some ways. So there's a question here. It says, being trained as a lawyer, yet running a pharma company yourself, what tips do you have for anyone pursuing a career in a field where their academic credentials may not align directly with their role? And do you actually believe that your academic credentials don't align with your role?
Well, let me say that I didn't learn anything in law school that prepared me to be the CEO of Merck, that's for sure. I learned a lot of things that were sort of counter to what I do. But I think this goes back to the conversation that I lightly touched on when I came to work for Merck and for Roy Vagelos. I think he had a broad conception of what talent looked like. And if you were willing to go outside your comfort zone and you were willing to learn, he was willing to give you that opportunity. So I guess what I would say is that, in a company like Merck, we place a lot of value on people who have deep knowledge, and you need that. But there's also value with people who are willing to learn different areas. And so from my perspective, it wasn't my law school training that prepared me for it. I think it was my work at Merck. And I would make one more comment about business school. And I think business school is extremely valuable. My colleagues know a lot more about the fundamentals of business. But the value creation in any particular company is unique to that company. And you need to not only know the generalities of business, but you have to really understand what drives that company. What I learned working for Roy and very early, and I constantly believe, is that the differentiator in Merck is science. And so the quality of science is what matters at Merck, and therefore the quality of the scientists is what really drives the value at Merck. And we've had CEOs who actually didn't, I think, appreciate that that was the magic thing about Merck. And so business school training wouldn't help you if you don't really understand what is the true differentiator in your particular company.
I love that. It's kind of one of those things when we think about even here at the business school, and I'll just preach from my podium here for a second. Mm-hmm. The idea that, in fact, as a business school, the investment that we have in our faculty to develop the faculty, to help the faculty thrive, is so critically important. Absolutely. For making the school thrive. Absolutely. Right? And so it's really important to think about where that value lies. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you a question that probably don't get asked often, but we were chatting and I learned that, in fact, you are an alum of Penn State University.
I am indeed.
And a few years ago, my colleague Modube Akinola and I, teaching the leadership class here, used the Penn State example with the Jerry Sandusky situation as an example to really think about ethical decision-making, ethical leadership. So it turns out that you are a noted Penn State alum. You served as a university trustee during the investigation and trial of Jerry Sandusky. The trial eventually showed that there was a huge ethical breach in leadership at the top levels of the university that had been ongoing for quite a while, which directly and negatively impacted countless student victims and countless young people. Can you talk to us a little bit about the experience of being in that situation and how your experience dealing with ethics, not just in your professional life, but more broadly in your personal life, is also something that you have to think about?
So I had the opportunity to chair the task force of the board that did the internal investigation of the Jerry Sandusky situation. I think that for us, one of the fundamental things that we had to ask ourselves at the very beginning was, what are we trying to serve? because there are different constituencies inside the university who had very different points of view on that and very strongly held points of view. Our head football coach, Joe Paterno, there'll never be another person who coaches at one school for 60 years. It will never happen again. But we decided that we wanted to listen to a couple of constituencies and do what we thought was right by those constituencies. So first, to the point that you made a few minutes ago, we worked closely with our faculty senate because this really hurt our faculty. They were so committed to that institution. And we wanted to do our investigation in a way that the faculty had full faith and credit in us and that we weren't trying to hide anything. But the most important thing for us is we decided that we were going to put the children first, because these were young children who were molested. So what we ended up doing was we ended up hiring an independent person, the former FBI Commissioner Louis Freeh, and we said to him, we want you to do an investigation. We're going to be completely hands-off. We're going to find out the results of that investigation at the same time that the world finds that out. And that investigation turned out to provide information that was really not helpful to any of us, including the board, right? Not helpful to our reputation. But I think we got to the bottom of the issue, and I think if you look at the university now, it's doing really, really well. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but I look around at other institutions that have tried to hide things, right? I look at other boards that initially, the Michigan State board initially said they were going to circle the wagons, but the public's opinion basically overrode that. You saw in today's paper, and I hope this is not too controversial, but the Pope is now convening a meeting in the Vatican about what's happened in the Catholic Church. That's what happens when the public loses trust. Because, I think what the public is saying is the church exists for the laity, not for the bishops, and not for the people who wear red cardinal suits. And I don't want to be too controversial about it, but that's another example of what happens when an institution doesn't do an investigation that gets the public's trust.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing with us.
But that was painful, I can tell you,
Mm-hmm.
because there were many people, there are many alums of the university who felt that we should have been defending the university, not opening ourselves up to that kind of investigation.
Yeah. There's so many important lessons that can be learned from the example that you just shared for many, as you just pointed out. So I'd like to open it up now to the audience for questions that you all might have. I see hands. I think we might have microphones to run around to you guys as well to make sure that your question is captured by the camera. So I see a hand up here in the back.
Thanks for coming. My name is Mooney Jaitley. I'm class of 2010. I'm just curious. Congratulations also on the new appointment of becoming director. And all the faculty should get raises. You guys are driving the school. So if you were the CEO of Starbucks or were advising him when this whole bathroom incident happened a couple of months ago, what would you advise or what would you do as CEO? Is it the right move ethically and also in the long-term interest of shareholders to allow anyone to use the bathroom? I mean, isn't that the responsibility of the municipal, government? It's just something that kind of, I've started going to Starbucks lately and I've become friends with the baristas and they're complaining now because they're finding heroin needles in the bathroom, and I think it's all going to backfire on them one day. What would you do if you were the CEO of Starbucks?
Well, I don't know that situation intensely. I only know what I read in the newspapers. So on the one hand, what I understood to be the case is that in most neighborhood Starbucks, people feel that it's a gathering place. And so people are allowed to sit there. I know that's certainly true. That we happen to live in the sort of suburbs of Philadelphia. That happened in Philadelphia. And you don't get chased out of the suburban Starbucks. It's a meeting place. People show up there, to have business meetings or to have social meetings. And so the concept that you have to buy something before you use the bathroom is not enforced where we live. I'll be honest, the complexion of the people that live around us are a little different than they are in the inner city of Philadelphia. So that's one side of it. On the other side of it, of course, is what you're saying, which is you have to have some rules. But I think the challenge that Starbucks has is that they ultimately do know that they try to position themselves as a meeting place. It's not McDonald's, right? In McDonald's, you get your cup of coffee and you go, right? Right? That's why they have that drive-through. Remember the famous case where the person spilled the coffee on themselves and they got a lot of money and everybody said, I don't really understand it. Well, the reason the jury gave that woman money is because McDonald's won't let you sit there till the coffee cools. You got to go. That's their business model. That's Dunkin' Donuts' business model. Get your stuff and get the hell out. But Starbucks does position itself as sort of the neighborhood gathering place. And I think that was their challenge. And I think that's why they decided to do the sensitivity training. But each one of those things is a hard case. And I think you just pointed that out.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Rachel Wasser, class of 2019. Thank you so much for being here. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the decision to resign from the President's Manufacturing Council.
Did I do that?
I mean, I know it's been talked about a lot, but I would love to hear about it from you. And I'm particularly curious when you're facing challenging decisions, who you consult with and how you what's your process? Okay. Thank you.
This is a very good question. So in the situation that involved stepping down from the Manufacturing Council, I want to start by saying, as CEO of Merck, I don't think it is my right or my responsibility to tell people what to think about political issues. That's not why I'm in this role. But when that situation arose, I did not see that as a political issue. I saw it as a moral issue. In other words, I don't think that you have to ask people what party they belong to decide that they don't support Nazis, okay? And when that happened that night, it was very clear to me that I felt that if I stayed there and didn't say anything, that would be viewed as my endorsement of what the president said in his original comments. And I felt like that was not something that I could do. And so I decided that I was going to step down, and I called my board before I stepped down, but I asked them a very narrow question, and that was this. I said, I'm going to read you my statement. And the last sentence of the statement says, as CEO of Merck and as a matter of personal conscience, I feel the responsibility to take a stand against extremism and intolerance. I said, I will give you the right to withdraw the words as CEO of Merck. If you don't want me to speak to the company's values, I'm happy to do that. I'm out of there anyway because, that's my personal view. And I should say, because the country's so divided, when I originally joined the Business Council, I got a ton of criticisms from my friends who were saying, well, why'd you join it? So at the end of the day, I think there's always the institutional responsibility, which I think the last question really raised, that you have as a CEO. But ultimately, you have your own personal values as a human being, and nothing is worth giving up your own personal values. So that's how I did it. It was really clear. I came home that night, and my then 21-year-old son came home from school because he had an urgent question to ask me about this whole thing, and he phrased it as follows: "What's up, Dad? What's up?" And when you get a question like that, you know you have to deal with your family too. Okay. I hope I answered your question.
Hi, Ken. Thanks so much for coming. And prior to joining business school, so I'm Jackson Kim. I'm class of 2020. Prior to coming to business school, I was working in the industry, and I had a chance to observe the incredible development story of Keytruda. And one thing that really struck me was just how much open access Merck provided to drug through open research collaborations and compassionate use. And I'm just curious to hear if you could share how some of those decisions to take that approach was made, sort of in contrast to some of your competitors who are much more closely guarded with their product and innovation.
So I said I wasn't going to say anything more about Roy Vagelos, but I lied, okay? So back at the time when HIV was a death sentence and companies were scrambling to develop medicines to actually fight AIDS, Roy made a very important decision, and that was that he wanted to provide access to some of the early work that we were doing in our labs, because if other people could benefit from that work and it was going to reduce the road to getting to a drug, that was a good thing. And so I think it's very much a part of the company's view that we need to protect the composition of matter. We need to protect the actual molecule Keytruda. We need to have the IP around that. But for people who are trying to understand the clinical utility of the medicine, it's better to allow people to explore it in an open way. And so it wasn't a decision so much as behaving consistently with a series of values. And I just want to be clear, we don't just get up in the morning and say, how do we look like do-gooders? You know, those things that we do actually reinforce the values of the company. And I tried to say it up there, but I'll repeat it again. In the long term, the competitive advantage that a company like Merck has is its ability to attract and retain the best scientific talent. And if you behave in a way that's consistent with the values that those people have, let's say they're coming from academic medicine or they're coming from academia. You know, in today's world, they don't have to come to a company like Merck. They could probably raise enough venture capital to stay at Stanford or MIT or Harvard or a place like that. If they're going to come to Merck, they have to believe that the company shares their values, including their scientific, their medical, their humane, their ethical values. And so ultimately, I think sometimes people miss that when you're trying to do something. You do benefit in the long run because you can retain the right kind of talent.
Hi there. My name is Samantha Marshall. I'm not a student here. I'm covering this event for the communications department. Wanted to ask you about, to your point about the long-term approach that you should take as a leader. It seems like if you're a CEO and the average tenure of a CEO is, I think, 3 years, that it's a challenge because you're making decisions that don't pay off for sometimes a decade. And I think Indra Nooyi had this experience that she was making decisions very far out because she felt that was the responsibility of the leader, but she wasn't getting the credit, and a lot of people were grateful she was leaving the company, but it may not be to the long-term benefit. How do you face that challenge?
Well, I think in our industry, if you look at the investment lead times in our industry, it takes on average 10 to 12 years to develop a drug in our industry. So if you're trying to run the company in the right way, if you're trying to run the company in a way that allows it to discover and develop really important medicines and vaccines, you do have to take the long view. And when I first became CEO, I was making that comment. The company had long-term guidance in place, of which there were 3 more years of the 5-year guidance. What that guidance implied were what I thought were pretty large and indiscriminate cuts of the research budget. So if we did that, our stock price would have performed better in the short run. In fact, it got hit pretty hard when we withdrew the guidance. I think looking back at that time, for example, you mentioned something like Keytruda, we've talked about it. At that time, that program was generically known as the anti-PD-1 antibody program. It was just like any of the other programs. It could have been cut in order to preserve the short-term earnings. But I was very fortunate to have learned from a person who was first a head of research before he was a CEO, that you really do need to take the long-term view. And I think if you look at companies that have existed for a century or more, they've always done that. You can do things that are successful in the short run, but a lot of the companies that were successful, like WorldCom and Enron, and in our industry, Valiant, didn't make it for the long term.
Very good. There's a question over here on this side, and then we'll take the one that's right over here while you get the microphone to them, and then we'll make sure we get Frank here in the front. So go ahead, sir, please.
My name is Dr. Amana Bay. I'm a graduate of business school here. I did a PhD in engineering also at Columbia here. First of all, I'm from Guinea originally, so I really appreciate the work you are doing in Ebola because Ebola started in Guinea.
Thank you.
Okay? And I know people. I went there and an invitation of the president also to do whatever I could. So I deeply appreciate really what the company really do in that field. My question is, right now, my company, since I left GE, we're doing a lot of work within that. I think they focus also on technology, and one of the areas we focus on is really help for really minority. One question I would like to ask you, in the clinical trial area, what it is that your company is doing to make sure that enough minority participate in clinical trial.
Yeah. So that's a very big issue for us, and we have a doctor whose name is Luther Clark in our company who is working very hard to ensure representation of minorities, and by the way, women in clinical trials, because often those people don't have access to those trials. For whatever reason, they don't have the relationships with academic medicine. It's one of the things where there are huge disparities, but we're working very hard to ensure that our clinical trials include people of different ethnicities, different age groups, as well as different sexes. So that's a very important issue, and we're working hard on it. So thank you.
I think we were going over here.
Okay.
Yes,
Hi,
please,
hi
thank
Ken.
you.
My name is Ema. I'm just curious, listening to your comments around guidance. How do you feel about quarterly guidance and long-term guidance? And obviously, there's been some comments from Buffett and Diamond in terms of moving towards more long-termism. I guess my question is, do you really think that would make any incremental change if you were to move to maybe 6 months or move to a year from a decision-making perspective for you or for CEO?
Well, I don't believe in quarterly guidance. It's too short. I don't believe in long-term guidance. It's too long. What we do is we give an annual series of guidances that are really ranges that we feel comfortable with. I think the problem with the guidance is the positive aspect of the guidance is it's more transparent and your investors have a sense of where you're going to go. My concern with long-term guidance is that the management team gets more focused on making those numbers than it does on doing the things that are right. And what do you do when you look at your business and all of a sudden you don't seem like you're heading in the direction of the guidance? Then you have a really hard problem that you wouldn't have if you hadn't given that guidance. And as for quarterly guidance, I mean, our business goes up and down, and I don't really want to be held to that. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to run the business, as I said before, for the long term. And if it takes 12 years to develop a drug, from one quarter to another quarter, I don't want to end up, behind the 8 ball because I promised a particular number.
We have a question here in the front from Professor Lichtenberg.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about what I imagine might have been one of the more difficult episodes in Merck's recent history, and that is Vioxx. What are your reflections on that, and what lessons have been learned?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. We could spend a whole hour on that. I was the company's general counsel during that period of time, and I'll say a couple of things about that. So first of all, what I think people don't really realize about that was the whole Vioxx episode was the result of the company's decision voluntarily to withdraw a drug that the FDA never asked us to withdraw. And so you might say that it was a bit naive, but it was the company's belief that if you looked at other drugs in that category, which is Vioxx was a painkiller, that patients had access to enough other painkillers that didn't raise the cardiovascular risk. As it turns out, after we started studying all those drugs, it turns out that even over-the-counter drugs have similar risks. So that's why I said it could have been somewhat of a naive judgment. But I think the company in some ways got hammered for a voluntary decision that it made for the right reasons in terms of trying to be ethical. The other thing that I think that it really shows is the importance of fighting for a company's heritage. Because, the lawyers get a lot of credit because we were actually relatively successful in defending the 60,000 cases that were filed. Wall Street said it would cost us 30, 40, 50 billion. We ended up settling for less than 5 billion. But if people saw it as a litigation strategy, they missed the point. We were fighting for our values and our heritage. And we needed the scientists who came to work every day at Merck to be able to hold their heads up high and not to believe that what the newspapers were saying about Merck was really true. So the victory was not so much in my mind about the dollars and cents in terms of the settlement. It is that Vioxx never became a verbal shorthand for corporate wrongdoing like an Enron did.
Wonderful. There's a question here on the side. Yeah.
Thank
please.
you. Yes. My name is Courtney. I'm a CBS grad 2017. So we've spoken a fair amount about long-term planning, keeping the emphasis on the long term. I'm curious about the other side of that, which is dynamically evolving as the market evolves. So there's the old adage that the world is changing faster than ever, things are moving faster than ever, and I think that oncology is a particularly good case study of that. So I'm curious if there are tips that you can share on how to equip a team to work within that flexible environment.
So that's a great question, and it's not only just fields of medicine like oncology that are changing, it's the healthcare financing and delivery systems around the world that are changing very quickly. And so the flip side of saying that you need to be consistent with your heritage and your values is you have to be open to the kinds of changes that need to be made. So, we spend a lot of time in our company, for example, challenging our current portfolio of products. Are they the right products for Merck to have? What are the real economics around each one of those products and our businesses? So we sold our consumer business a little while ago because we just didn't think we were the advantaged owner of that business. It was good for cash flow, but it wasn't the right thing for us to invest capital in the long run. So I once had a boss who was the CFO of Merck. Her name was Judy Lewent, who used to say, you got to realize that the long run is composed of a series of short terms. So you got to run the company for the long term, but also be focused on what short-term value you have to create. So it's a balancing act that you have to have.
I see a couple more hands here. There's one here, and there's one in the back, and there's one right behind her over there. And I think we do have time for all of these questions. I think we're doing okay on time.
I think so, too.
I think so.
It's
okay.
the answers that are too long.
We're doing great. Please go ahead.
My name is Khalid Azim. Sir, my question is, have you, as a leader, have you ever made an ethical decision which you've come to regret?
That's a very good question. I can't think of one that I would call an ethical decision, but I've made a lot of mistakes, right? For example, paying a lot of money for a particular company that didn't work out. But no, I honestly can say I don't remember making an ethical decision. I think your values are your values, and it's hard sometimes to live up to your values because you sort of get beaten up in the short run. But you got to do that. And I will say one of the great things about Merck is that while it looks like I am the leader on the org chart, because the company has a set of values, including the George Merck quote, every employee in the company is looking at me and judging whether or not my behavior is consistent with the company's values.
Beautiful. I'm going to go back over here to this side, to the question on this side. Go ahead.
Hi, congratulations again. My name is Miming, class of 2020. So we just had our leadership bootcamp course. We were talked about, as leader, how to persuade or motivate others. I'm curious, when you make those difficult business decisions, how do you motivate, over 70,000 Merck employees, especially when some of the employees' sort of compensation is tied to, share price performance? How do you sort of think about that?
So one of the things that I don't believe in is this concept of sort of the CEO who has a lot of magnetism or whatever. Charisma. Charisma is the word. I think the way to motivate people is to behave consistently with the values that they already hold. I think companies are a little bit like when you go to the supermarket and you could choose what aisle you go to and what you're going to buy frozen food or fresh food. Maybe that's not the right analogy. But people who come to Merck because they know what Merck has always stood for. And I think my job in terms of inspiring people, if you want to use that word, is simply reminding them of who we say we are as a collection of rational, thoughtful people. And it is hard in the short run when you make decisions. Last year, we made a decision that really drove the stock price down in the short run. It had to do with extending a clinical trial for Keytruda to get overall survival data rather than progression-free survival. And the street hated it. They really drove the stock price down. They thought we were opening up the world opening ourselves up for competition for people to catch up to us. It turns out that it did pay off because at the end of the day, it's nice to say that the tumor doesn't grow, but at the end of the day, what we care about as human beings is, do we live? Do we survive? That's what doctors care about. That's what patients care about. So we decided to go for the outcome that mattered the most, and it turns out that it was a positive outcome for us, and the stock has more than come back since then. But for that short period of time, certainly it affected people. people were going to sell their stock to buy a house or send their kid to college. I'm not blind to those things, but at the end of the day, we always have to behave consistent with our values, including doing what's in the best interest of patients.
Right here, and then you can pass the mic.
Thank you for being here and taking our questions. I'm Dr. Jaitley. My background is cardiology, and I've been in practice only for 35 years. And I've used all your products right from Mevacor onwards to Vytorin.
Right.
Sorry, I just told you my age. and every single product of yours is so trustworthy around the globe. You know, I frequent India and come back, and every single one of them is 2 thumbs up. Even before Mevacor, the Vazotec, which was, I think, as another great drug which was used for asymptomatic LV dysfunction, even prior to the onset of a heart failure, you could actually prescribe these drugs. The whole idea, my premise on the question is, many times you go back and forth to Europe and to India and Asia, various countries. I find that the drugs were introduced much earlier. They're already on the shelf, and they are available to the consumers, to the patients, to the doctors, and the hospitals, much earlier than the United States.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yes, I know.
I'm sure they're real drugs.
And then you begin to wonder, why does FDA take so long to really approve drugs over here? So it's like, I can fully relate to the fact that they take too long, primarily because you want to make sure that everything is absolutely. But I think from a medical community, and speaking on their behalf, and I say that many times, I think tens of thousands of lives could have been saved had the FDA really taken a better approach in terms of approving the drugs. Do you from Merck and many other companies likewise feel the same? Have you felt that?
Well, I have to say that I think it depends on the category that you're talking about. If you're talking about a category where there are a lot of good drugs already, the FDA tends to be a little bit more precautionary. For example, with diabetes drugs, they want cardiovascular outcome studies because they want to make sure that the drug is safe over the long term. We have a drug that's coming out for chronic cough. Our phase 2 studies are just really terrific. But if you're going to give somebody that kind of drug for a long period of time, you really want to know something about the safety of that drug. With respect to Keytruda, which involves people who are dying and need the drug, I think the FDA has been incredibly fast in approving that drug, right? And I think, so I don't want to characterize them as being too fast or too slow. I think it all depends on what other drugs are in the armamentarium and how important this new drug really is. And it's rare, though, that we have drugs approved in a lot of other places before they are approved here in the United States. It does happen from time to time.
Okay. I was going to go right here to the woman here, and then this gentleman over here, and then I see Linda, and then I see, okay.
So I'm from class 2017. I'm also a physician working in the industry. So my question is that with the pricing pressure the industry is facing, how do you think that would change the way we do business? If there is going to be change, do you think that will be from the way we do discovery, development, or commercialization of the?
It's a very good question. I think the fundamental challenge that the industry business model has is that the cost of developing each new drug seems to continue to go up, and the pricing pressure continues to go down. Something has to give. That's not a very easy thing to do. So I think the challenge that we all have is to demonstrate the real value of the drug to the patients. At the end of the day, we don't want our drugs to be solely viewed based on the list price of those drugs, and so we spend a lot more money and time and effort in Merck in outcomes research and real-world evidence so that we can demonstrate what the real value is to patients and what the longer-term value is to the healthcare system in terms of reduced hospitalizations and things of that nature. I think that's really going to be important for us going forward. But it is the fundamental challenge of the business model that pricing is going down and the cost of developing new drugs is going up.
There is a question from a student right here. Please give her the mic, and then we'll come over here on this side, and then we'll come to Linda.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Stephanie. I'm class of 2019. So looking at the country now where the population is becoming increasingly multicultural. We know that in a matter of 2 decades, the underrepresented minorities will tip and become the majority. But then specifically looking at Black population and Black leaders, you are in a very small class of 3
There are a whole 3 of us.
Yeah.
Out of the Fortune 500.
3 of the Fortune 500. So you mentioned earlier that mentorship played a huge role in your path coming from Philadelphia. Thinking about us as leaders of color in this room, what can you say to us in terms of the outlook for our leadership potential and the opportunities in the marketplace, and how we can be better positioned to exploit those as we go further in our careers?
So I will say that I think that, so I'll just give my point of view. You know, my father was born in the year 1900. He had 3 years of formal education. And all of my life, he said to me, notwithstanding all the challenges of society, he always made me focus on the fact that the opportunities that I had were so much greater than the opportunities that he has. And I say to younger people today that the opportunities that they have are even better than the opportunities that I have. So one of the things that I say to young people of color is be encouraged. There are great opportunities. As you said, you know, I saw a data point the other day that said 1990, the people coming into the workforce in the United States, the percentage of new employees in the United States who were white in the year 1990 was something like almost 80%. Today it's only 55%. So diversity is a fact now, as you were just saying, it's a fact. So the question becomes, how do we encourage our people to take advantage of the opportunities that they have? And you know, without going into too much detail, what I always point out to people about this diversity issue is there are 2 separate gaps that sometimes minorities and women have to overcome. The first of which I call the opportunity gap, which means often are you given the same education that other people are given, et cetera, et cetera. For me, I was bused from 4th grade on to rigorous schools, and I realized that the kids who were raised around me in the inner city of Philadelphia didn't have that opportunity. That closed the opportunity gap for me. But then there's also another gap called the access gap, which is the access to mentors and sponsors. I started tonight by saying I'm only the CEO because a former CEO who happens to be in the room but will not be named again decided that he would take me under his wing and share with me some of the sort of unclear, unspoken things that have to do with being a CEO. So I think creating those kinds of relationships, and it's my responsibility. I had actually another person who was a great mentor to me was Ken Chenault. When I came over to the business side, he called me up and said, I think you should come over here every 6 months and we should talk about the difference between the law and the business. And you need those mentors and you need those sponsors, and people like me have to be mentors and sponsors.
Thank you. I think, yes, there.
Charles Fields. I'm class of 72 at Columbia. And of course, you just mentioned
class of 72.
Yeah. You just mentioned a very good friend, which is Ken Chenault. But you know, you 2 are leaving. He's left. You probably are going to be leaving. But I want to just make a comment.
You're not going anywhere.
Let me make a comment. When I we're going to do pro bono. What I really like to know is that I know that our patients, we're going to have board certified medical doctors, but our patients are wealthy individuals. There's a whole market niche of consumers out there, including the diplomats. When they get ill, they fly out of Africa here, 12 hours. Our hospital's less than an hour and a half away. So what I'm saying, or what I'm probably asking the question is, knowing my past relationship with Merck, whether or not you guys would be interested in our business, your medical business for that hospital, because we're going to start incorporating construction on that hospital next year. And I really want American products because I cannot trust the products that I see. They give all the descriptions on paper, but I can guarantee you, when you take it to the laboratories and do your analysis, the compounds that they say are in there are not in there. And I know that our clientele is going to demand the high standards. So I'm saying to you and your friends, hey, this
Happy
deal
to
is
do
American.
business with this medical center.
So that's the
I'm
question, whether or
serious.
not you guys are interested. That business is going to start next year.
Happy to do business with you.
Yeah,
You
well,
know,
Bob Holland's going to be involved, well as Chenault.
Right. Okay. Happy to do business.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, we had, Linda Green right here has a question, right here in the front.
So getting back to the FDA, I wanted to know what your view was of the right to try movement. That is, providing access to drugs before they actually have FDA approval, particularly for potentially life-saving drugs, cancer drugs.
You know, right to try is one of those things that has enormous rhetorical appeal, but we have to be very careful that we're not taking advantage of people's sense of desperation. Inside Merck, we ask the question, do we have enough scientific information and data to suggest that this drug could be helpful to this patient? And is there enough on efficacy and is there enough on safety to at least lead us to believe that this could actually be a positive thing? And I think that as long as the FDA is involved in making that judgment, I'm okay with it, because that's the current system we have right now, right? We make our drugs available on a compassionate use basis way before they're approved, but we need to have some scientific basis to believe that on an individualized basis, this drug is going to do more good than harm to you. And so that's how I feel about that.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. I saw this young man's hand here and this young man here. That's it.
Okay, I'm sure
Those
these
2.
are going to be really hard.
Those are going to be the hardest questions. These 2 right here.
Sasha Balmier, class of 2018. I'm also a physician. When I first started, medications were being marketed to physicians, and pharmaceutical reps would come to your office and talk to you about different drugs. And now with all the new regulation, everything has shifted to consumer marketing. And now physicians have to deal with a lot of misinformation. What are your thoughts on the regulation of the pharmaceutical industry as far as marketing towards physicians?
So a couple of points of view. I think, first of all, I think one of the things that has taken away a lot of the discretion of the doctors is not the DTC, it's really the managed care providers. What we see is that often, with the formularies that are in place in the managed care environment, physicians have few degrees of freedom in terms of what they can really prescribe. But to go to the DTC issue, I think DTC is often abused. I think broadcast DTC has hurt this industry's reputation more than anything else has in terms of how the public perceives us. I do see the value in some of it. So for example, right now, we only run commercials for Keytruda. They're black and white commercials. And we're trying to teach something in each commercial. We ask, is there a medical fact that we're teaching that person? So the current ads, they teach that there is a study that shows if you take Keytruda and you have lung cancer, your chances of survival are greater than if you took the standard of care, which is chemotherapy. We think that's a good thing for sick people to know, right? And that's the whole point of the commercial. I think at the end of the day, we have to make sure that those ads are not gimmicky ads. I think there's too many ads for the little blue pill and that kind of thing. I think that hurts our reputation. I will make one comment that's probably controversial, because I say this to my physician friends and they get angry with me when I say it. And that is that the one thing you can say for direct-to-consumer ads for drug companies is that the patient can't prescribe themselves the medicine. They still have to go to the doctor and have a learned intermediary. I see all these ads in Philadelphia for doctors now, and Fox Chase Medical Center and Cancer Centers of America. There's no one between the patient and that advertisement where they say, our new technology is the best thing for prostate surgery. So sometimes I want to say, physician, heal thyself when it comes to DTC. But I didn't say that.
So thank you, Ken. I'm a PhD student from the Decision Risk and Operations Department here at the business school. Recently, there is a very influential movie in China, I guess some Chinese people here know, called Dying to Survive. It's based on a true story, I guess about 10 years ago in China, when a leukemia patient got cured by some cheap medicine from India. I guess it's called generic medicines. And he smuggled medicines to cure 1,000 cancer sufferers in China. But in the end, he got imprisoned. So I'm wondering how you think about this generic drugs and about the people, this effect that people in the, say in China and India, they cannot afford the branded drugs.
So, you know, one of the things that we support very strongly in Merck is the role of generic drugs for just that reason. Our job is to invent new medicines that are breakthrough medicines. And we generally have market exclusivity for 10 years. But when that's over, we try never to do anything to extend that. At the end of the day, we think it's a good ecosystem. If people can get access to generic drugs, that actually frees up some of the budget for the next generation of new drugs. So we're very strongly supportive of generic drugs. And by the way, in the US, 90% by volume of drugs that are prescribed are generic drugs, right? So often people will say drugs cost a lot. And I say, well, what is the price of a drug? Is it the drug's price on the first day when it's at its height? Or is it 10, 15 years later when it's a generic? What's really the price? Someone just talked about Vasotec and Mevacor, right? These are Merck drugs that have been, in effect, donated to the world now because they're now generics. And we think if a generic drug is the right drug for a patient, therapeutic and economically, the patient ought to get that drug.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. We are going to give a rousing round of applause. I want to highlight for you all that we just experienced history here, having Kenneth Frazier here at Columbia Business School receiving the Botwinick Prize for Ethical Leadership. It has been a wonderful evening. We actually have a reception planned in the Hepburn Lounge on the first floor. If you go down and come out of the elevator, you go to your left. It is the lounge around the corner. We'll be making sure that there are people directing you. Please come down and spend a few minutes with us. Shake some hands, say hello to each other, have some drinks and refreshments. There are some refreshments, so please come down and spend a few minutes with us down in the Hepburn Lounge. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you again to Ken.